So I want to welcome all of us here to our Alliance program for December. And this is, as you know, it's about the trip that we had 14 people from First Church attend and make a wonderful pilgrimage. And I'm going to let them introduce themselves to each other, to you all. And most of you will know all of them. And I'm going to turn it over to Michael Griffin, who will begin the presentation. So thank you, Michael.
Okay. Okay. So welcome everybody to our presentation on the Camino Finisterre, a pilgrimage to the end of the world. We are going to begin our journey today with one of our pilgrims, Margaret. And if you want to take us off in the journey to Finisterre.
All right. They're different names. The Camino de Santiago, Santiago de Compostela, the Way of St. James, or you'll just hear it called the Way. All refer to our pilgrimage taken in 2024. There are many routes, starting in France, Spain, and Portugal. Most end in Santiago de Compostela. Our walk started in Santiago and ended in Finisterre, which means the end of the world, or where they thought the world ended. The Camino started in the Middle Ages as a religious pilgrimage, sometimes walked as a penance for sins or part of a sentence from a judge. Now people walk it for religious, spiritual, a personal challenge, or as a time to reflect on life. For some, it is a spiritual retreat. For others, it is a challenge of endurance. Although the Camino can be crowded, you can find many moments of solitude, beauty, grace, and peace. One can read the guidebooks and watch the videos, but until one puts on their hiking shoes and start walking, you really don't understand the magic. The magic really is inside of you. The scallop shell is a symbol of the pilgrimage, as depicted in our Tiffany stained glass window. You'll see it in the pilgrim's hat. The shell as a symbol, has many explanations. Most likely it was used as a cup or a utensil to eat. Remember, there were no disposable silverware. Other fictionalized explanations are St. James returned to Finisterre after he died on a ghost ship. A bride and groom ready to celebrate saw the ship, and the groom falls into the ocean and comes up covered in shells. St. James is the saint who is sent to Spain to revert to Catholicism. He leaves and goes back to Jerusalem when he thinks his job is done. So this is after he comes back. Another mystical story is about Vanker, an Armenian bishop who walked the Santiago de Compostela between 1491 and 1493, wrote about a terrible anthropoid lycanthropic beast, which means it's the precursor to the werewolf. He apparently met this wild, dangerous beast that would scare pilgrims or eat them. One question remains: how could he, the bishop, save himself when groups of 20 couldn't get through? Vanker is one explanation why people didn't complete the Camino. Others are sickness, robbery, fatigue. A system of hospitals were set up along the route as a respite spot. This is the beginning of community hospitals. We'll see a picture of one of the former hospitals, now set up as a fancy hotel. Of course, not the hotel we stayed in. The Camino started to regain popularity in 1957, after several authors wrote about their travels. Now the numbers walking is in the 100,000s. You are given a pilgrim passport and instructed to get 2 stamps a day to document your journey. If you want a certificate, you need the passport to prove you completed the journey. Not everyone gets a certificate. You have to show your passport and give your birthday. I asked, who is the oldest person my examiner gave a certificate to? He said it was a 95-year-old man from United States.
So thank you, Margaret. As we said, the day before, the square right in front of the cathedral is one of the places where everybody comes to celebrate. And the day before, there was a small church group that we were lucky enough to see that was getting stories and touring all around Santiago, singing and chanting and learning all about the pilgrims and the pilgrim stories. So it was neat to follow this group around a little bit and dancing, and they were getting videoed. And these are just local children from Spain. So it was just a neat story there. And then our journey really begins the next morning. So we set out bright and early, and each daily journey of our pilgrimage began the night before. So on the night before, we'd meet as a large group, and we'd get stories and discussions about themes for the next day and reflect on the day before. As part of the practice, which was one of my favorite parts of the day, is we began the day in silence. So the first 30 minutes of every walk was totally quiet, where you just reset your mind and thought about the spiritual message for the day as we begin to walk off. This is the 0 marker beginning on our walk to Finisterre. And as we walk through the town, when you enter and go, let me backtrack a little bit. When people come into Santiago, they usually come through this gate that's located right to the right of your screen. And in this gate, there is a constant bagpipe playing. It's a Galician tradition that has been going on since the times of the first pilgrimage. And this is the sound that you hear consistently going through. So as we walk through this gate, we hit where the parador and we hit where our journey truly begins. In the left, we walk right past the Parador de Santiago de Compostela, which was the original hospital that Queen Isabella formed, and it was formed basically for the royalty when they would do their pilgrimage as a place to stay, but eventually turned into a hospital for all to attend. And just to give you a little bit about the passing, it's the Plaza del Obradorio next to the Cathedral of Santiago de Compostela, and it's one of the most visited cathedrals in the world. It has witnessed the passage of pilgrims over the centuries. It began as a royal hospital right there for the Catholic monarchs to offer shelter. Today it is known as the Hostel dos Reis Católicos. And as we walked on through town, our first day we were traveling from Santiago to Negria. It is our longest walk of the entire trip, and it began with a very long climb up to one of the highest points around Santiago. So we all climbed up the hill, we waved goodbye to the city, and we marched on. And our thought for today was on mindful attention. Our intention for the first day of our pilgrimage was to cultivate a mindful attention to the natural world, as well as to the interior landscape of our spirit. Our goal for the day was basically slow down, breathe, pay attention, and notice. As we walked through, it was just a beautiful landscape that we're walking through. And what first hit you along this first big climb was the smell. To me, it was the smell of the eucalyptus plants. And these eucalyptus plants I'll talk about a little bit later, but they are basically an invasive species that hasn't been there for a long time. But it was just the most wonderful mind experience that you can go through. And the walking through the forest as we began, and then eventually we came to the Ponte Marcia, which is a bridge overlooking the Rio Tambra. And some of us had lunch before crossing the bridge, and some cooled their feet in the river, as you can see. It was a really, really nice place. And the legend has it that this bridge was destroyed in a single stroke of lightning to prevent the Roman soldiers from pursuing the cortege of St. James. So, as St. James was the pilgrimage, this whole bridge collapsed and they rebuilt it. And it's one of the Roman bridges that connected over the time. So it's really kind of neat there. So as I said, here's a picture of a lot of us. Here's a look at the many of our travelers from First Church. One thing that we all had in common was the scallop shell, as Margaret talked about. We carried it and displayed it as a sign of being pilgrims. One thing that we all noticed on the first day again was the eucalyptus. Now these were brought over by Father Salvador in the mid-90s as a private initiative. He thought he was helping the community and everything by providing a cash crop. So they use it for wood and pulp, but over time it is an invasive species and it's really sucking up all the nutrients around, and it's become like a weed tree for a lot. But there's still a big debate in Galicia about should they take them all out or what they can do, because a lot of people do rely on them as a cash crop. And to me, they smell wonderful. I just love the smell of eucalyptus. As we walk through along the way, there are many crosses, both altars and as guide markers. So there are many burial churches. Every town had a very small church that we'll see as we go through. And as we walk through, you can stop and pray. The center picture here was just an altar just right along the road. Nothing else around it, but just the cross and the altar. And on one side of the cross was always Jesus. And on the other side, sometimes there were figurines or just decorative features that you can see. So as we enter Negreira, we had our first hotel stay, and it's a small town, kind of populous around. And we were all very happy to make it at the end of this day. As I said, it was one of our longest days, and we all enjoyed some cervezas and some tapas as we rested and got ready for our next day. Day 2 had us going from Negreira to Granado. And as we parked in Negreira, we walked through the walls of the Capella de San Mauro. This is an old town that was surrounded by walls and at one time was connected with Santiago itself. The rulers there incorporated their mansions into the tower walls itself, and we had to walk under this bridge. And then right away, we took an ulterior design because our thoughts for today were on gratitudes and blessings. So as we walked along on our third journey, we think about gratitudes and blessings. And as the Talmud says, it is forbidden to taste the pleasures of this world without a blessing. So as we walked, we became aware of our gratitude for the pilgrimage, for this time apart, the beauty and the bounty of the earth, and for all the loved ones in our lives. It was a very beautiful walk, about 3 kilometers along this river that was just winding through a forested area. Really beautiful. And then just the different sights that we saw. The path was very quiet to start the day, and just a beautiful wooded area that we were able to walk through. Now, that is not to say we didn't take time for breaks. So there are plenty of places to stop to have a coffee, or what I would say is the most delicious orange juice I've ever had, because every place, the smallest little shop, would have a machine just full of oranges that would squeeze your orange juice right there. And it was one of my favorite things to get along the whole way. The Casa de Sabia and the cervezas at Casa Pepe. When we arrived, in the bottom picture, you can see Richard and Nicole sitting in the bottom picture. There was a large group of pilgrims from Spain that like took over the place. So we ended up sitting and drinking amongst the laundry. I would say they were hanging out all the sheets for the hostel that was right in there. It was just it was a lot of fun and cold beers. And as everybody came up in the group, they all just take a little seat, take a little break as we walked on to our next stop, which would be our bus stop. And we walked to the end of Coronado. And I will say that this bus stop was in the middle of about 6 buildings and a little bit of farm area. So we waited here, waiting for our bus to take us back to Negraria, where we start today. As you can see, one of the little local cats was amongst our visitors in our luggage as we go through there. And our third day, we walked from Coronado to Oliveros. This was really neat because the day started off as a very foggy and mystical morning as we were walking through. One thing that Rob warned us of was that our trip was going to be rainy and dreary and cold. And I will tell you, it was anything but. We had the most beautiful weather, and this mystical weather just provided a perfect day because this day began with silence and solitude. The intention for the day is to be silent for the entire journey and notice what emerges in the silence. So instead of just walking for 30 minutes, we had to walk the entire day without speaking. This led to a lot of hand communication with me and Nicole because we were going through different areas. So today, like every other day, we wake up empty and frightened. Don't open the door to the study and begin reading. Take down the musical instruments. Let the beauty we love to be what we do. There are hundreds of ways to kneel and kiss the ground. That was the thought process we were given the day before. And as you can see when walking through, it was very mystical and quiet, and the different views going through. One of the things that you'll notice is all the different flowers that were blooming as we walk through. As we did walk, one of the sites we saw along the path was the dolmen in Peruxberia. It is over 4,000 years old. It's on the top left corner of the screen here. And it's a site for sacred ritual and worship. It was for pagan rituals, but also for the early Galicians. And they did a lot of sacrifices here. The odd thing about this landmark, it's in the middle of an active farm field. So to go to it, you have to find the farmer and ask permission if you can walk up to it. And on this day, they weren't allowing anybody in, but I mean, it's crops all around this old altar. So it's just kind of really neat. And as we walk too, you can see the flowers. I think all of us were amazed by, especially growing in the rock, in the walls and everything. The path was long and journeyous, but everywhere we look, it just kept changing, and just kind of every time you looked at different ones, it was just the vista was so beautiful. Along the way, there were many local churches and burial grounds were open to visitors. A lot of times you just walk in. Sometimes the churches would be open, sometimes they would not, but they're all active churches, and most of the small ones in the towns are about the size of the ones you see here that you can go. On this journey, some of us journeyed and took a different path than the traditional path, and we walked up to the Mount Arrow, which is the highest point along the journey to Finisterre. And on this point, you can see a 360-degree vistas featuring many windmills. The one thing that I was most surprised about were the number of windmills in the entire area. Every ridge had windmills on it, and wind energy is a big part of Spain's power system, and they're constantly putting up more and more. So also just remember, if you have any questions, either just raise your hand or unmute yourself. So we descended into Olvero, where we were welcomed by our pilgrims. And the best thing about this welcoming is we all got to scream hello. It is a very small town. As you can see, it is a traditional town that had a lot of stone houses surrounding it through the different lanes. So on this day too, Olvera was really kind of neat because I was lucky enough, there's this little church in the town, just similar to the other ones. And when I was walking up to it, one of the patrons was cleaning out the church. So I asked her if I can come in. She didn't speak English. I spoke a little Spanish, so we got in. And then I went to light a candle because in each church I light candles for my parents, Nicole's parents, and my brother. So I go up to light the candles and put money in, and I'm going to put in a euro, and she's waving at me, no, 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 too much, Toto. But then I put it in, and she just burst out laughing, and she goes, Todas las velas, somos benedicios, which basically she said, you lit a candle for everybody. Every single candle on the area lit up. So I lit up with my €1. I think I lit up 40 candles. So it was quite a neat. And then we just had a quick chuckle, and she pointed out a few things in the church. As you can see in the center, it's very small, a nice little altar. And later on, when Richard and I were walking past it, if you look at the bell up on the top, there's a string attached to it that comes all the way down to the wall across from the church. And a gentleman was just standing there pulling it and ringing it. And to this day, Richard, I don't think we know why he was doing it. It just like signaled the end of the day. It was close to sunset, but not really sunset. So I think it was just a marking of the town, and there was no service that night. One thing Richard and I were doing was walking to Santa Lucia. And here is an enduring tradition is to heal eye ailments by washing them in the clear spring waters and dry them on a white cloth left out in the air. This is an allusion to drying the tears of remorse at past wrongs in order to heal spiritual blindness and refresh the psyche and soul. So both Richard and I have refreshed our psyches and souls and can see the world in a brand new light. I think the scariest part for both of us is when you walk up to it, as you can see this sheen of water. We had no idea how deep that was. So we stepped in, and luckily it was only about 2 inches deep. So we're like walking right up to it. And you can see all these white little tissues that people wash their eyes and then just hang them out in the bush to dry. So it was really quite a touching moment, and just a little on the outskirt of the town itself. So on day 4, we once again start walking. As you can see, the beautiful stone buildings, and some of these are granaries. So they're active granaries where they dry the wheat that they harvest inside them. And they're raised up on the stones there to prevent any kind of creatures from climbing up and eating out or living into the area. So it's an old traditional method of drying wheat. And nowadays, as you approach the more I would say the more rich areas, they become a decorative piece of wealth. So, they look nicer. But our walk begins through Olivier and the traditional stone houses and granaries. And today's focus is on come healing. Today's pilgrimage is about a healing practice of physical, emotional, relational, and spiritual wounds. So we're taught about how to think about how do we heal and how do we move forward. As we climbed up to the first mountains, we did walk past a cattle, and these cattle were very, very fun to watch because they were feeding and there were a lot of calves there. And then after passing the cow pasture, we come to a very important junction. And this is a junction between Finisterre and Murcia. So it is called the Crux Opposition. So we had a choice to make. Were we going to walk to Finisterre, or were we going to walk to Murcia? Luckily, we all took the right turn, and we continued our journey up a large mountainous area kind of, and it's just a long, long path. We had to walk by a coal factory. Luckily, it wasn't burning anything at that time, but we ended up going into the forest. And as Margaret talked about before, many pagan forebears walked this route centuries and centuries prior to the Christian era. And it brought about many mythical tales. And as Margaret talked about it, there was Wagner. And the Wagner is a very kind of a neat story because at a unique crossroads where two main traditional paths diverge, one to Murcia and the other to Finisterre, a mythical creature appears. And an Armenian bishop who walked to Santiago in 1491 to 1493 wrote about a terrible anthropoid lycanthropic beast, a precursor to the werewolf. And he apparently met this wild and dangerous beast that would scare pilgrims. And one question remains is, how could you save yourself when groups of 20 people cannot go through because they were scared off by the Vakhdar? And there's other stories about fairies. The little lightning bugs in the air were fairies, and if you caught one, they would take you to the underworld or to the fairy world. And this was basically the the Christian hierarchy trying to scare pagans to not go through this area and for the rituals. So it was quite neat. After we made it through the forest, none of us were eaten, none of us were scared off or taken to the dark world. We got our first glimpse of the ocean. And at this point, I would like to transfer over our presentation to Richard, who's going to share with us some of his thoughts and poems as we walk through.
Yes, thank you, Michael. This has been such an engaging presentation. And on the day of silence, when we spent the whole day, most of us, in silence, that prompted a number of haiku and poems that I wrote while I was on the trail. And at the end of the day, people were beginning to get a little concerned about me because I hadn't arrived as everyone else had. And Jeannie O'Farrell said, "Oh, that Richard, he's probably writing some poems, so don't worry about him." And indeed, that was the case. So here I will share several Camino haiku. On the Camino, flowers are the daily bread for my pilgrim eyes. I am arrested by fern fronds in the middle of a path of stones. Suddenly alone, my inner life looks less known than the moon's craters. I am the tortoise to everyone else's hare on the St. James Way. Today I word fast and dine only on silence. It is so tasty. Deep in revelry, a cricket's chirp lets me know I'm not all alone. I like up better than going back down, but flat, flat best of all. And here's a longer poem. At a certain point on the trail, I decided I'm going to want a little privacy. And so I went to the left into a field of pretty tall ferns and sat down among them. And I was completely hidden by the ferns. And that was a great place to be writing about poems. Among ferns, I lie down among them and listen to their many fronded tongues in their green language. There is a music to their unfolding into a climax of sun-soaked radiance, the leaping joy of their multiplicity, the repeating refrains that signal survival, even in granite. I am learning to trust in them, their supple flags waving in honor of each small crevice a spore takes hold in, the earth anointing every discreet corner, with or without my notice.
Thank you, Richard. So we pick up our journey again with our descent into sea. And this is one of the steepest descents that we'll make as we go through. And as we're walking, the part where we really don't like is a big long downhill. And as we walk down, we're just noticed about the beauty all around us and the pictures. And you can see the path itself was not treacherous, just a lot of uphill and downhill windy. It's sort of like walking around Belmont, but in the forest and a lot better views. So when we got to sea, some of us went on an optional excursion to travel to the Fall of Azaro. It is the only freshwater river in Europe that directly flows into the sea as a waterfall. And it resides at at the foot of Monte Pindo, and it's one of the most sacred places of Galicia. It's sometimes called the Mount Olympus of Spain as we go through here. And the reason why is because this sacred mountain is where the ancient gods lived alongside the giants. In the Druid era, they thought a lot about this mystical area. And Monte Pindo is filled with huge boulders, stones, and many of which resemble human-like figures and animals. It's an area, if you just visited, you can explore and climb up these waterfalls all around us. So a bunch of us got in a taxi and drove there. One of the other things that was the most famous areas that I think I liked a lot was the beach. So C has a little cove beach, and this is Lauren walking just from the beach. I thought this is our little superstar movie moment. And we were able to just sit here. There was a local family that run a little snack shop where you can get a beer and some food and all that stuff. And what was neat is every time you sat down, you just sat down. They came by, asked you what you'd like. They bring some olives or some bread or some chips. And it was just such a welcoming feel by everybody there. And you always ate a lot. So the beach here is a cove that we were able to stop at before ever. If you go across from the cove, this is the beach that Lauren was walking up right here. You can walk out on all of these flats. And in the flats, there's a lot of worms and barnacles that are digging up in the area. Being the explorer that I am and scientist, I loved going out there and just trying to find all the different things. I found crabs. I dug up some big worms that were about a foot long. Most people would say it was disgusting. I thought it was cool. I will tell you that. But the flats are full of living creatures. Sea itself is a local fishing and industrial port with a residential population of just 7,500 people. This whole area was destroyed by Napoleon. When he came through, he just destroyed everything in the path in this whole town. And today, they're still rebuilding some of it. You can still find relics from the time of Napoleon and pre-Napoleon. And there's a lot of history along the Rua Rosalia de Castro that features a lot of 18th century frescoes that are just along the street. So a neat thing that we're walking through is like we just notice all this beauty and history around us. And then it's like us walking through Boston. We just take for granted that all this history is here. And it was just so fascinating to walk through. And I went into a little museum that was nearby that was all on nautical things, and they had a lot of local artists who put paintings up in the area. So a lot of pride in the history that's going through. So our next day, day 5, we walked from sea to Finisterre. As you can see, we walked over the mountain that you're looking at right there to get through there. So we leave Finisterre and with a walk along the ocean and then dive into the forest. But prior to going in the forest, there is a 12th century Romanesque church of San Marcos. It was then modified in the 15th century. It has a nave with the Baroque chapels inside. And when we go into a lot of these churches along the ocean, they all had different nautical themes to them. And there's different stories that go in with all the statuary that were in Spanish. And luckily, the Google Translate, we were able to figure out some of the different stories that go through. The path out of the city was very narrow, as you can see Nicole walking through along the fenced area, but eventually we make it to our next theme. And our thing along the way this time was letting go. We are walking to Finisterre. A pilgrimage can reveal things that we carry in our lives that we need to just let go. A burden, a loss, a grudge, an identity. As we walk to Finisterre, our intention is very simple today. Let it go. And as we walked, there was a artist that had his garage door open. And as you can see, he has quite a lot of scallop shells there. And he was just working away, paying no mind to all the pilgrims walking by. And letting it go doesn't mean that we don't get hungry, because always there's a place to stop and have some coffee. So we stop, sit, and chat. And what was neat about stopping during the day, because as we were pilgrims, none of us started the day really together. Everybody was off on their own. And as you stopped, people would come up and you'd meet and you talk and you chat about different things and learn different histories about going through. Then you'd walk a little while together and just trying to chat. It was just a lot of easy conversational and reflection that happened along the way. The journey to Finisterre was once again through the many eucalyptus forests, and finally we reached the sea again and the beach that would lead us to Finisterre. So as you can see, we're walking down and we're going to Finisterre, which is the big mound you see behind us in the picture to your right. However, to get there, we had to walk along this 2-kilometer beach. It is the soft white sand of the Praia Langostaria, which is a 2-kilometer beach of pure white sand. And we were just a short 6 kilometers now from our end goal. So as we're walking along this sandy path, we know that the end is near. We know that we can let go, and then eventually we make it to the end of the earth. So walking along the hills after the 6 miles, we end up at the end of the earth at the famed lighthouse Faro. So this lighthouse, which is no longer in use for seafaring because it's all computerized now, but this is where we end our journey. Not quite yet, because we're still going to Muxia, but this was the big one here for the pilgrimage. And here at the end of the journey, just below the lighthouse, are several pilgrim monuments to visit. The Atlantic swells crash over the headland, which is 126 meters below the lighthouse. This is the point where we're asked to throw a rock or a shell that we've been carrying along our pilgrimage as a symbol of letting go and just letting our past go and going into the new future. Traditionally, what pilgrims would do would be to burn a note or a small piece of old clothing and to see where their ashes blow away in the wind, just like letting go of their past, letting go of their burdens as a symbol of moving forward. And this is where St. James also did some of his preaching. So the town of Finisterre, again, is a fishing village, and it's protected by a large berm that you can walk out onto at the very end. We all gathered in town for dinner and the reflections on this journey. And right after dinner, many of us, well, we didn't have enough time walking, so we walked right back out to the end, another 4 kilometers. So we walked back to the end of the earth to see sunset. It was a beautiful, windy sunset that a lot of us just sat there. And there was, I would say, about 700-800 people out on the area here. Some pilgrims, some tourists. They did bus people to this spot that you could go to, but it was really quite picturesque as we experienced the sun setting on the world. And we go from sunset to sunrise. So this is sunrise over the harbor. And from sunset to sunrise over the harbor, our 6th day began with a walk to Elirs. Our journey begins as we exit the town, thinking about how on the Camino, the scallop shell is always there to mark a clear path forward. But life isn't always so clear. So today we are asked to consider how we sometimes lose and find our way in life. Some of us didn't realize that this was a very this was a statement that would make our day seem very special. Let me just put it that way. So as we walk through the town, once again, we were walking uphill. We say goodbye to Finisterre, and unbeknownst to us, the theme kind of predicted what our group would experience on our walk. We head up a hill with some last of the glimpses, and then we all gathered once again at a meeting spot. Little coffee stand. As you can see, they made some pilgrims out of stones and rocks. And below is where our real kind of lost and found journey began. There was a group of about, I'd say 10 or 12 of us that decided to take the coastal route to Elirs instead of doing the traditional route. And as you can see, we started walking up this hill, and then we would end up walking all along this ridge line here. And as you can see, we had a lot of discussions about should we go forward or should we not. We finally convinced the group to say, yeah, we're all together, we can make it. So we did climb through some narrow paths, up steep climbs and down the coast. With the encouragement of everybody, we made and found our way. So we actually had to climb down this crevasse here, almost to the water, to cross over a little river and then climb back up to walk along the ridge. I'm happy to say we all made it, and we were all still happy. You can see that the path was very narrow, and we were along. It doesn't look like this is too steep, but it is. It is a very steep and narrow path. And as you can see by Declan here, we kind of, is there a path? Is there not a path? It was about a foot wide, so we had to really be careful about our footing. But eventually we made it to Aliers, and we just waited here. We all had lunch and gathered. And once again, this is kind of neat at the end of each day because we all just gather, have lunch, have some beer, have some drinks, have some food, and just kind of talk about our day before the formal part of it. Now, some of us didn't walk the whole journey, and they got to experience something very, very special, as Margaret is going to tell us a little bit about one of the festivals that happened during the day.
This is a first communion. So many people go on this for Catholicism, spiritual, but it's definitely a Catholic country. So they shut down this little church the night before, even though they said there was a pilgrim mass and we could hear people inside. The next day, you see these little kids. The boys were dressed in light blue sailor outfits, and the girls had these like bride communion dresses on. The whole town comes out for this. And then they have a whole service. Then they walk through the towns. The police shut down the streets, and they put all these palms and hydrangea plants, and you walk through it. It goes for 2 miles. They stop at different spots with the host that normally does not ever leave the church, but there was one point, I don't know if you have it there, where you see the canopy and they have a band marching and the sound. So I think on the left is the canopy. But you have a whole band playing music.
I believe I have some of that sound, so.
I have to get my camera out.
Okay, I'll stop for. So you can hear the drums and the music. We made like the first hour. None of us being Catholics, we decided to have an ice cream and watch the world go by. But it also was very special to be part of this local First Communion tradition. Uh-oh, did I freeze?
I think we're good now.
Okay.
Okay. So after this day, we were bused back again to Finisterre. And what was interesting about this sunset that we'll see in a second was when a group of people went out to the sunset, they found the place kind of empty. And we were all kind of wondering why. And then when we came back from the sunset, we figured out what was happening. There was Real Madrid was playing in the championship game for some European festival. So all the stores closed down, the bars were packed, but nothing was open because everybody was watching the game. And we had a bar right across the street from us that once we came back, the party was going on, and I think it was Germany who scored, and Real Madrid was behind, and then they came back and they won it. And the party went on till 1 a.m, driving around, honking horns and all that. And we're all like, we got to sleep. We got to get up the next day. But as you can see, out here is the point where the lighthouse is. So that's the end of the world. Now, one thing that's interesting is, remember, the Catholics were trying to put down all the Druid and the Galician history of the area. But where I'm taking this picture from is actually along a whole area above the lighthouse, where many Druid ruins that were used in ritual sites are located. It is along this area that you will find the Hermitage of St. William, and it is said that St. James himself preached from this spot to discredit the pagan rituals practiced along this ridge. The pagan site is the Era Solis, which I'm going to point out in a little bit, and the heathens believed that in the fertility of the power of the Era Solis, while the Christians believed in the saving grace of Christ. So basically, immortality is not achieved through reproduction, which the pagans thought, but through resurrection, which the Catholics thought. So they were the juxtaposition, and as you walk through here, you can make out some of the old altar ruins. And when we had sorry about that. When we had sunset that night, if you look out at the very point of the land here, this is the beach that looks at the Era Solis. It's the first reference site by the Romans in the 1st century. When they arrived, they came across the Phoenician altar and witnessed a thriving place of worship. So the Druids were still there, the pagans were still there, and there's an altar way out at the tiny point of this area that these rituals took place in. So it's just kind of neat seeing this history. And then when the sun sets in the perfect spot from where we're at, it actually at one point will set right in between that crevice, between the end point and the main part of the island. So just kind of the history is just everywhere that we can see. On our last day of the pilgrimage, we are transported back to Illiers. And on this day, we start off where the bus picked us up. Our theme for this day was new possibilities and returning home. So what new life do we desire? We reflect on the new possibilities that have awakened us in our journey and how our lives may be different when we return home. So as we walk today, we're thinking about a rejuvenation of ourselves and our thought process and our bodies and what we're going to take with us as we return home. We walk once again through the many farms and villages, farms everywhere. I mean, if I had a kitchen, I would jump out and grab a lot of this stuff to cook. It was just really quite amazing to see everything. The granaries, as you can see, all along, abandoned roads that would guide us along our paths. And just walking. Now, some of us did get lost again because Nicole and I took an ulterior route. And this one, I will tell you, the path did disappear. And we ended up in the middle of a field. We didn't know if there were any cows in there. And the only way that we could see where we were going is Nicole found a wall. We were able to jump on top of it and able to point out our destination, which was the ocean again. So we knew that we were near Murcia, and we climbed over the sand dune around Praia de Lorido. And before climbing up a slope to the main road at Punta Vista that leads us into Murcia, once we came out of this beach, believe it or not, we came across a football game. Championship, I just can't imagine playing soccer here, playing football, with that ocean behind you. There's beautiful vistas in every direction, and this place was packed with cars as we walked by. But then finally, we enter Murcia, and then we walked all the way to the very end of this one, where there's a lighthouse at the end that marks the spot where St. James pilgrimage ended. So this is where the boat came, and I'll talk a little bit about that in a second. So we stand at the site of Our Lady of the Boat. The legend claims that the Virgin Mary arrived here on a boat made of stone to help St. James in his ministry. St. James at the time thought he had failed and came to Murcia to pray and to rest and to reflect. He prayed, and he saw a boat with the Virgin Mary aboard, full of mystery and majesty. The Virgin assured him that his ministry was a success and that his work was now done. He would return to Jerusalem, and the boat became petrified in stone. All the boat parts here are scattered and identified along the way. Now, as we see Margaret standing next to the stone, one thing I want to point out is that there is a legend that if you crawl under this sail 9 times, you are cured of rheumatism and all associated ailments. So, being the adventurous sort, I did it. And I'm going to say I don't have any rheumatism, but I'm not going to claim it as a true thing. Other parts of the boat other parts of the boat nearby have similar stories. There's a judgment stone that is part of the keel of the boat where people would be judged if they were telling the truth or not. There's a part of the hull that is flipped over that if you kiss your beloved there, you're going to stay married forever. So, yep, me and Nicole kissed. And we are still married, so hey, so far so good. The sculpture that we're standing in front of is more of a modern sculpture, and this was built after a oil tanker split in half and almost devastated the area's fishing industry with the langosters or these big sorry, the word's gonna skip me right now. These barnacles that you can eat, and they're not like tiny ones, they're really big, and they're served everywhere. So they built this monument as a symbol that this will never happen again. And it stands there as a reminder to make sure that we protect our seas and protect our oceans and that we're all part of it. Walking up the back side of it, we walk through what was the old town, and you can see still walls and ruins outlining all the houses and the way back to Muxia. The picture up in the corner is a picture of the church that in 2013 burned. The town went out, they rescued most of the artifacts inside, but inside the entire church was all burnt up. They rebuilt it and they painted a mural in the back. They painted the mural in the back of it that now looks like what the church used to be. Now, at the top of this area, as we go to Muxia, there's a cross that overlooks the town. And at the base of this cross, there was I would say about 50 to 60 pairs of shoes, pieces of clothing that people just left as to say, I'm done with walking. I'm done with my pilgrimage. My feet need to give it a little rest. I'm not putting these shoes on again. So it was a nice spot to just see overlooking the town. And the town just pretty much just fills in this little inlet area as we go by. So this is our whole group, before the last picture on our pilgrimage. And these are all the UU people right before we're going to have some dinner of our journey. And our last day was a return to Muxia, and return to Santiago, where we gathered once again for a group picture. And I just want to play this song because Rob taught us a song that to this day, I still sing in my head when I go for walks. And if you just give a little listen. So that song, walking with you is my prayer. We'd sing it over and over again. We'd sing it at every evening meeting to just a way of bonding. And I think every one of us at some time that song just pops into your head. And it's just a really nice communal idea of how we're all blessed to be able to do this. Oh, we then got a tour of Santiago. A bunch of us went to the Pilgrim Mass inside the cathedral. This is a picture from early on, from above one of the mountains or one of the hills that's right by, showing the whole grand display of the cathedral itself. Inside the church, it was quite beautiful. The naves inside it, you can walk all the way through. A lot of history, a lot of pictures going in it. Here we can see some of the detail of the angels, and along the sides, there were no two that were identical, as you can see. And one of the really neat things about this, as you can see here in the center, is the Buddha Fumero, which is basically the big incense burner. That the word Buddha Fumero just means that lets out smoke. So it was to symbolize the smoke rising to the top of the temple, symbolizes pilgrims' prayers going up to God. The true reason for this incense burner, pilgrims smelled. So it was a way of disguising the smell of all of the pilgrims at the church so that we wouldn't have to smell each other, because a lot of them, were, haven't bathed in months, still wearing their old clothes. And one thing that's neat about the church here is a couple days before, Nicole and I took a tour of the church, and we're up on the roof of the church, which is all concrete. And it was made that way so the soldiers can run across the roof to defend from the invaders coming in, because the Moors actually overtook the cathedral, took down the original bells of the cathedral, melted them, and made them into lanterns that are now inside a mosque in the Middle East. So the original bells for the cathedral were stolen, brought back, and are in Jerusalem in a mosque there. Now, one thing is, too, if you look at the picture on the right, you will see it's the tomb of the Apostle of St. James. Below this statue are the bones of St. James down in the crypt that we walk through. Now, the statue itself is a stone image of the seated St. James wearing a silver cloak. And the pilgrims are able to walk behind this statue, and you embrace your hands on the silver cloak as a way of worshiping and embracing the altar, embracing St. James, and marking the pilgrimage. And this whole grandioso thing, the interesting thing about all these different depictions about St. James, none of them really look like he was. He's like this guy on carrying the sword and everything. All these depictions, he would have had to live from, the time of his pilgrimage up to the 1800s. So he's probably, 700 or 800 years old, defending Spain for everything. In the center, this is the real Barafumero, which when we first arrived in Spain was taken down because they had a problem with the pulley system. But when we returned to Santiago, it was actually up in the church itself. And if you wanted to see it swing, if you ever get a chance, take a look at a picture of it swinging. I used to use it in my classes for physics all the time, so I geeked out when I saw it. You could pay $500 and they would swing it during the Mass for you. And there would be a pilgrim Mass every single night. There was a couple during the day that we all attended, and it was quite nice. And then after the Mass, we all gathered, and I'm going to hand this over to Jeannie now to do a little reflection on the end of our journey. There you go.
Thank you, Michael. On our second or third day, I think it was the second day, in the afternoon after we arrived in the Greda, one of our group members, Alan Price, we were talking, he said, we are already a community. And in the remaining days, I observed our El Camino group becoming a beloved community, one that provided safety and belonging, which is just what we needed to share with one another how we were blending our spiritual intentions for the pilgrimage with the physical discipline of walking. Often in periods of silence each day, I was able to contemplate the ancient stone walls that I found so intriguing. While I did not walk as much as any of my group, I did experience a gradual sense of detachment with walking that I did. By meditating on the rows of vibrant green corn sprouts and the ancient stone walls covered with gray-green moss and silver lichen, I reconnected to some unsolicited advice I received many years ago when I sought detachment, to wear the world as a loose garment. My experience of El Camino was transformative for me because I still, to this day, feel a sense of detachment from the hurry and fray of the world that the news broadcasts. I suggest that you think back over what you have just seen in this presentation and see what we saw, feel what we saw, feel what we felt, hear what we heard. An open path cast with wildflowers, the tall ruby red stalks of foxglove, punctuating the lines of yellow Scotch broom growing along every wall and stream. Find the rest stops to fortify the pilgrims, then travel twilight journeys to see the world's end sunset, where ocean breezes buffet your face like spirits from the other side of the veil. Follow the rocky paths along waterways to the drinking springs sprouting from the mountain's heart. Bask in bright faces and happy destinations where locally brewed beer that has anti-inflammatory effects caps a day's long quest. Then rest and recoup before the starting silence of the next day's discoveries. Thank you.
So this is our last picture as a group right outside the cathedral. And just a couple more slides to show you some of the fauna or the animals that we saw along the way. Cats everywhere, dogs everywhere, cows. I met these two ladies here in Muxia, and they actually made all the lace work that was in the church that we saw in the day. Food was very plentiful. So lots of seafood, as you must know. As you can see, there's a picture of our coffee du jour. And for me, my favorite thing was basically the pan con tomate, which basically tomato on toast. That was my breakfast every day, which was delicious. And a lot of people had a lot of ham and cheese for breakfast. So it's quite delicious. And one last look at the cathedral in Santiago. A vast history of many changes took place. The original bells were transported to Moors, and this became a pilgrimage spot where many people end their journey and walk through. So we thank you all for joining us on our little journey, and now we'll open it up to questions that you may have.
Very good. Well, thank you so much, Michael. That was just incredible. And for the whole group, I mean, I think it gave all of us a real in-depth chance to see what it was like and to see the spiritual journey you all were on. And I'm going to mention before I send you all off to ask questions, I want to remind you that our Alliance programs are the second Thursday of every month, and very similar to this, we have some really exciting ones planned in January. On January 9th, Lanier Smythe is doing part 2 of her trip to Uzbekistan. She did part 1 on the fabrics, tapestry, and she's going to be doing this next one on the architecture, which will be wonderful. And Mark Rosenstein is going to be doing our February Alliance program, and he is an absolutely incredible underwater photographer of fish, and so he'll be presenting that. In March, we're going to have Richard Waring, who you've heard his wonderful poetry. He's going to be doing one on the Galapagos, and that's a place I've always wanted to visit, and this may be my one chance. And in April, Andrea Prestwich, who's part of our church and works for NASA, is going to be doing one on something related to astronomy and the solar system. So those are going to be our next 4 Alliance programs for 2025. And I just love seeing so many wonderful faces out there. So please join us on the second Thursday at 11 o'clock. And I'm going to pass this back to Michael for questions. Just remember, you all are muted. So in order to ask a question, you will need to unmute yourself. Thank you.
Any questions?
I have a question.
Yes, Chris.
Is that okay? Gosh,
Yeah.
so thank you so much. What a wonderful presentation. So I have I'll just throw them out there. I would love to know about the person whose name I don't know, who organized this pilgrimage for the group, as I remember when it was advertised. So I'd love to hear some reflections about that. I also was like, oh, I thought the pilgrimage path was like one way, like the only way to get to downtown Boston. But it seems like there were sometimes you got to make choices. So that was like, oh, and then I'd love to know about where you stayed.
Oh,
That was a lot.
well, let me begin with the pilgrimage path is actually, there's 7 different routes to Santiago. So we actually started at a point where not a lot of pilgrims start at. So we started in Santiago and we walked to Muxia, which is basically one of the pagan walks to the end of the year. So I think because of UU, we were trying to not do as much Catholicism. There was tons of it around us. We couldn't avoid it. So that was the path. Now, the point where we came, where we split, you can walk downhill to Finisterre, or you can walk around to Muxia. You can go either path that way because it circles around. Because what St. James did when he left Muxia, he returned back to Santiago. And then he went to Jerusalem, and we all know what happened there, off with his head. And then his body was brought back to Santiago. And that's when it became the big pilgrimage to walk there. There's France Way, the Winter Way, the Portugal Way. So there's 7 different walks to walk to Santiago. And one thing Nicole and I are planning to go back and try and walk one into Santiago, which should be quite interesting. Rob, who was the minister at the First Church in Cambridge, was one of the main organizers. He had done this pilgrim twice before joining us. And like I said earlier on, when he did the pilgrimage before, it rained the entire time. So it was neat to see him experiencing views and things that he had never saw before, even though he was there a couple times. One thing that was nice is we only had to carry our day packs with us for luggage. So the places we stayed at were just different hotels along the way. They were quite nice. They were very comfortable. The food was good, like I said. And if anybody else wants to comment on any of those, please feel free to jump in.
I'd say the hotels were 2 stars. They were clean. They had clean sheets and they had a bathroom, private bathrooms. Other than that, you would not write home about any of the hotels, but it was much better than the hostels. And some people carried tents and camped along the way. So I was grateful for every 2-star hotel.
Yeah, it was neat
I would
talking to
say
all the
that.
pilgrims who were walking the entire journey, because you talk to them and they were camping along the way. And like I said, they would just find a place. And if it was pouring rain, they had to set up their tent in the rain and just sit on the outside. You can find hostels all along the way, but like what Rob did, we had station spots where we had to be. So it was really relatively easy for us. We knew we had a cover over our head and a warm place to be. And the other thing along the journey, if you ever couldn't walk, you could probably get a cab, call it up. There was I remember one side that was kind of funny because it was a taxi run by Jesus. So Jesus was his name. So it was kind of neat.
I'd like to add that the food of Galicia is absolutely delicious. I ate a lot of mystery food. I had no idea what I was eating, but it was very tasty.
And I'll give you the story being one of the vegans in the group. Galician food is interesting. And Galician is different than Spanish. The language is totally different, as we learned and as I learned after going through some more Galicia. The term vegetarian and vegan does not make sense to them because they think vegetarians eat fish, eggs, and all that kind of stuff. So we had quite a lot of discussions on what we could eat, but we did find good food. As we can say, and a lot of variety of different things to eat. Yes, Kathy.
You mentioned early on about getting stamps on your passport. How did that work? Where did you get the stamps?
So at a bar, at a coffee stand, at the different churches, they would have a little stamp that proved that you were walking along the path. So we had a little booklet with us that we would get stamped.
But not the
Kind
full-
of like little kid stamps. You had a machine that just put a stamp on it.
Yeah, if I can find I'm going to try and find a picture real quick.
That way it was to prove you did walk it. And
Yeah, it
not
was the proof.
everybody gets a certificate.
No, and none of us got a Compostela for Santiago because we didn't walk into Santiago. So you only get a sticker if you walk into the building itself. I mean, into Santiago itself. You don't get a sticker if you just walk the path. So we got a certificate of miles walked, and you have to walk at least 100 miles to get a certificate.
I have a
100
certificate.
kilometers. 100 kilometers.
Yeah, could be kilometers. Because I have a certificate. I did not find it easy to find taxis. I did not find as many cafes as Michael did. Michael thought that beer has anti-inflammatory properties, so he found more than me. I was in the group that
Scientifically proven there.
scientifically proven. I was in the group that this was a big physical challenge and may have been the last one in. We had a saying, we're slow as nails, but tough as nails. So it was a big deal just to cross the finish lines. And I'm quite proud of my certificate.
That's good.
Looks like Meg has a question.
Hi, I'm David, not Meg. 3 questions. First of all, what time of year was this?
It was the
Second,
last week of May, first week of June.
great. Second, in addition to the restaurants and the hotels, are there comfort stations along the way? I know it's excuse me, but
Yeah.
at this age, it's something I want to know about. So
Well, there's always the natural baño
yeah.
in the trees, but there was plenty of places for bathrooms and stuff. Most of them were free. Every now and then you'd get somebody who would charge you for a bathroom break. But most were free.
And the third question is, and you might not know the answer to this, was any of the route destroyed in the recent flooding?
I don't believe it was in that area per se.
Yeah,
So I'm not sure. I mean, some of the route was because of the many different paths, but the route we took was not part of the flooding area.
Well,
I
thank you.
was in Valencia in September, and that was a beautiful old town that did get flooded, but that was southern Spain, and we are in the northern west corner, so we weren't near those floods.
Well, I want to thank you all. It was a really beautiful presentation, and it really gave a wonderful feeling about the journey and the experience. So thank you.
Thank you.
So I want to share the screen one more time. So this is the book. I think you can see that. So this is the book. We got all our stamps. This is Nicole and I at the 0 kilometers to Santiago. We had just gotten through to get our certificate. So this is the book, and all the stamps were very unique to each of the spots that you're staying at. Like I said, some were from cafes, some were from our hotel, some were from churches, just about anywhere you can get a stamp. So just to show you that.
And then will Rob, he's the minister at First Church in Cambridge. Is he going to do another pilgrimage at some point?
I'm sure he will. I don't know who will do with us. He just did another one with a group that did a pilgrimage in Scotland. that they walked for 7 days, I do believe, and he had a good time. He preaches in Cambridge 2 to 3 times a month, but his family lives in DC, and that's where he's from, but he is the Cambridge UU minister. He was just got the full-time job there. And his name is Rob Hardy's. Sorry.
Yeah.
Nicole? No.
Yeah, I I really enjoyed it very, very much, so much that I would be delighted if you would care to do a similar pilgrimage from Notre Dame in Paris, because there is a pilgrimage, Notre Dame in Paris, through Chartres up to Mont Saint-Michel. And it's
Ooh.
really, really wonderful. And it's flat. Oh, I would encourage all of you to do so.
Very good.
But this was absolutely beautiful.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anybody else have questions for us?
Yeah, I have one last question. I was
Yeah.
interested in the different themes that you had on each of the days. And you said a little bit about being prepared for those themes the night before. Was there one person that provided that for you as you traveled, someone, a guide that traveled with you?
Maybe the Rob.
So Rob developed
Yeah.
our whole pilgrimage, and each day we would get a piece of paper that had our mindful attention for the day. It gave us a quote about our intention.
Mhm.
It gave us a little synopsis of what it was, and then it had a reading that we had, and we do this on our own. And then it talked a little bit about the practice of going through that walk. How should you walk? What should you do? What should you really start to think about and engage with? And then it also gave you a little bit of reflection that at the end of the day, you just kind of think about before going to our meeting. And at our meeting, we all had a chance to reflect on how that theme of the day affected us, meant to us, and made us feel.
Mhm.
So, I mean, I was wary of doing it at first, but I found it very, very beneficial, and it was very moving each day. It was one of the highlights of the day, I would say.
It
Yeah.
seemed like a wonderful exercise you told us about.
I'd like to add that it was generally the hour before dinner, so we were all starving, waiting to eat. But it was basically, we started with a check-in or with a song, the walking song, and we do a quick check-in with everybody. And some of us had nothing to say, others had more to say. And then they began breaking us up into groups and giving us a theme to discuss that we could draw from our experience that day. That was very nice. It's another way to get closer to the people there and to hear their individual experiences.
Hmm.
That's great.
Well, I think that's everybody's questions. So we thank you all for joining. Oh, one more.
Just
Go ahead.
just a couple of quick responses from some of the people who went on the group, went on the pilgrimage. After 6 months, what sticks with you the most?
Well, I'm the one who said that. I can't speak for everyone, but just looking at these photographs, just meeting with this group of people, we became so close. And we started walking again this fall together. And what I found was that if I just go back and visualize where I was and listen, to the rivers and think about the people I met, that I fall back into this sort of reverie, and I'm transported back to the peace that I felt there. And I once again have my loose garment on, wearing the world as a loose garment. And I really do have retained a sense of detachment that it's mild, but it protects me during this time of political chaos. It's just enough to step back from the news and the sound bites and not listen to them all the time. I mean, I listen to the news maybe once a week. I read some news journal that's a weekly journal, and that is a practice I have gotten into that I find very protective in these chaotic days.
I didn't get all the spirituality that I wished I did. I think I do that kind of stuff daily, pretty much. It was a physical challenge, and I was immensely proud how well I did. So you can go for many reasons and you get many different things. I love the beauty of the walk. As you can see, 1 minute we're in a city, then we're in a forest, then we're by the ocean, then we're in farmlands with cows, and stopping in a cafe where they had to put a rope so the horse wouldn't eat your food. You know, it just was spectacular. And I'm amazed I did it.
For me, the trail, the pathway was kind of like the Mississippi River for Jim and Huck. And, you greeted people along the way, Bueno, Camino. And then if you stepped off and started to be friendly with somebody from a town, they looked at you really strange. So to be on that path was this stream of joy and wonder that, stays with me as I continue to enjoy being with these people that we're still connected to one another and going on walks in Mount Auburn Cemetery and elsewhere. So it's been a real joy and a deep sense of community.
Yeah.
Sharon,
To
you want
just to
to?
echo all that, it's a reminder to appreciate what's around you, look, enjoy, ask, talk, and just slow down. I mean, things move too fast nowadays, as we all know.
Mhm.
Yeah, I think it was for me. Whoop, am I
Good.
unmuted?
You are
Yep, you're
good.
on.
Oh, well, number one was the community, the sense of community that was built. But within that, the ability to do it, as Margaret said, the physical. I'm not an athletic type of person, so for me to be able to do the walk was really important. But out of both of those two came the sense of being present to my life and realizing how much of the time I spend in busy work and get caught up in, the myriad of things that attack you every day. And to try to take a step back and say, wow, to just enjoy being present in the moment, wherever you are. So a deep sense of gratitude for the ability to see how important that is, because you can't do it if you don't realize how important this is to your being. So, do you want to say anything?
I would wake up so stiff in the morning, and the only thing that made me feel better was to start walking, and the walking felt wonderful.
One protection for us was that the people of Galicia believe that God chose them to protect the pilgrims and to take care of the pilgrims. So every time we stopped to ask somebody a question, they dropped everything and just helped us. And it was it was just so amazing that this was throughout the area we were. Very beautiful.
I stopped to talk to a woman, even though we didn't speak the same language, because she had beautiful flowers. She had installed a water faucet that you could just reach over in her front yard. So that's protect the pilgrims. Do you want fresh water on your walk?
Well, I think we're good, and it's time for lunch.
Well, thank you so much, and thank you
So-
everybody for coming. This has been